You got this, and you got that, and you gonna murder this one and murder that one. Talking all that bullshit. I'm gonna put it to you like this, yo.
This is for the nerds, this is for the brainiacs, this what we deserve. Go ahead and play it back, you ain't gonna touch me, you not gonna do nothing, you are not above me, I bet you wish you was me, I know it, I know.
What is poppin', everybody? And welcome back to another special episode of the Only Friends podcast. Well, you know, it's me and my only friends, which includes, but it's not limited to, my boy Hunt. What's poppin', baby?
Hey, Conrad, I can't see your face over there. You wanna reveal yourself a little bit? You're hiding yourself.
Relax. He's a fucking tailbox, man. He needs all the help he can get, you know?
Listen,
Well, I feel like
with
there's a lot of energy. You know, there's a lot of tells to be gotten from Conrad's energy levels.
yeah.
You missed an opportunity to say it's me and my COVID friends.
COVID's over.
Well,
you look like
COVID's over.
you look
That's
like
only if
patient
it-
zero.
That'd be only if I was like making a joke about it. Like I stand with
2,000 people died of COVID last month, Berk.
Oh, okay.
it.
Okay.
Is that a lot?
I don't know. 2,000 people. Is that a lot? I don't know. Did a lot of people die in 9/11?
Wow, we're starting off.
Don't get him started, bro.
Don't get
the total started on the
2,000 people died last month from a lot of fucking things.
Yep.
What are we talking about here?
I'm just gonna come back tomorrow and let you guys do this topic.
Oh, it's fun to just stir some stuff up.
Wow.
Speaking of which,
I mean, not to say that there was only 2,900 people that passed away in September 11th, but yeah, I thought it was more for some reason.
Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you that these are apples and oranges, and I don't know why we're bringing the two of them up.
what a great way to start a podcast. Let's just go straight to 9/11. Straight to talking about 9/11 within
Wild.
2 minutes.
I mean, shit happens,
We
man.
don't plan this.
Clearly.
Do you think it was an inside job, Hunt?
Stop. All right, can we move on?
Stop. I just want to clarify. I'm not gonna leave that line there because it makes it sound like you think I'm actually believing that. Absolutely fucking not. I'm not one of those guys.
I don't know. That's not what you said off air.
Oh, apparently. Okay. Here we go.
I'm joking.
Here we go.
I'm just kidding.
Brian, he's waving off the people.
Where's Kanye?
I wouldn't do that.
Kanye's in here somewhere.
Kanye's. He's our next guest.
Yee. Oh man! All right. Well, we're gonna have a fun show today. Obviously, it's impossible to ignore everything that's been happening with Twitter losing its mind. Pretty much, it's not a good week for the old guard. I gotta tell you, it's not a good
boomers
week.
have gone insane. They've gone insane.
They're becoming senile.
You know what it is, and I can speak to this a little bit because we're not all that far apart. It's difficult to age gracefully, man. And I don't mean like physically. Like, I mean, it's difficult to find and carve out your space in this world as you continually get more and more displaced from where you previously were. Mm-hmm. And I think we're seeing a lot of that where it's like, you know, guys like Daniel and Phil, they have been the leaders of this industry, the face of this community for the better part of 2 decades, and they've earned that right to kind of sit upon the Mount Rushmore of poker. The problem is that doesn't make you a pundit on everything in the world. And I know that this is like the running joke that, you know, poker players think that they know everything about everything. Mm-hmm. And it's like, to some degree, the logic and reasoning and critical thinking that it takes to be a good poker player does have applications outside of this space. And so, you know, we do hold our own opinions in pretty high regard. But the problem is that I think we're so used to making rapid decisions in game that we forget we're allowed to take a moment and, you know,
take a beat.
Yeah, take a beat perhaps.
Yeah, you don't always have to express every thought on social media that comes into your
Instantly.
mind. Yeah.
Instantly, it's like these guys just, you know, they're bored and scrolling, and it's just like, oh, fuck Ike, man. Ike's wearing a mask.
Yeah.
I saw this guy smoke a cigarette.
Yeah,
Are you kidding me?
There's a difference between putting a random spontaneous tweet out there, which is about like a movie you just watched, versus putting a random spontaneous tweet, which is like calling out another player for something completely innocuous and causing a big dispute between people.
Listen.
You can take the mask off.
What?
You can take the mask off.
I stand with Ike.
Yeah, we got the point.
That's real rich coming from you, Burke.
I wasn't going to be the one to say it.
Hey,
I'm
glad you're all having a good time. It took me 3 days before I put that tweet out to dunk on Jonathan for fucking making an egregious tweet. I sit on my things very, very long. I also run them through the group chat plenty of times. I very rarely just spontaneously tweet. Now, my drafts are a different story. The day I die and you guys get a hold of my passwords and send the drafts out, that's going to be a stream of consciousness that maybe the world's not ready for.
Wow, next time you leave your Twitter open, I'll just do it. You don't have to die.
No. Your drafts stay on your device.
Ah, fuck.
You gotta do it for my phone. That's where the gold is. There's not much going on the
cold storage
on the desktop, but yeah, I mean, it's like, the thing is like, it's hilarious because the hypocrisy is so rich in this one, and if it weren't for last week, this would have just like been nothing, and it would have been just a typical day on Twitter where like people say things out of pocket, they get hashed out and they move on. But like, when Daniel makes this crass joke about how Ike has like he's seen Ike outside the PokerGo studio smoking a cigarette and doesn't go to the gym, that doesn't mean he doesn't care about his health. Like, first of all, I get it. Like, I understand where the humor is supposed to come from. It's in the irony, right? Like, but you have to really craft this joke well in order for it to land. And the issue then becomes that you're exactly what you were accusing everybody else of being, which is bullying, right? Mm-hmm. And like, I don't think this is bully behavior because whatever, you're poking fun, but I also like am giving you a massive benefit of the doubt here that maybe Ike won't when he reads it. And in that thread, he basically just did call out that behavior for exactly what it is. He's like, once they went through the back and forth of like Ike saying like that actually didn't even happen, whatever the case may be. He said something to the effect of like, just stop it. Like, not only have you never seen me smoke cigarettes, but like you actually did tweet that just to make fun of me. He said like, it's down in the thread, but he said, but carry on. Carry on lightheartedly making shit up to insinuate I have some ulterior motive behind, besides health for masking. And it's like now Daniel has to go on and on and on and explain it was just a joke. It was just a joke. Why can't you just take a joke? Yada yada yada. And it's really hard not to point out the hypocrisy here because you're actually targeting something personal to the guy, right? Like. My understanding is that Ike's wife is immunocompromised or something to that effect, and that's a big inspiration behind why he wears the mask, which is now a pretty sensitive subject, and you're just taking shots at the guy. Whereas like the whole thing that devolved between Daniel and I based off of a tweet I sent at Jonathan was literally just like appear in the space where I don't agree with a strategic thing, right? Like that's not personal, but it comes off as somehow this big bully tactic where I'm tearing down a competitor for the benefit of my own good and whatever the case may be. It's like you can frame things however the fuck you want. And we have the opportunity to give people the benefit of the doubt or not. And that's kind of like where this thread devolved into. It's like, okay, well, you don't get the benefit of the doubt anymore because you're the guy who's on top of the mountain shaking his fist saying, I'm here to stand up for all the little people. It's like, well, now who's here to stand up for Ike, right? It's like this is just complete and utter nonsense. And the whole thing, if you guys are unfamiliar with what we're talking about, to lay the groundwork, was from an interview that Hellmuth did with poker.org 2 days ago or yesterday, I think. They have a new podcast coming out. They gave a nice little breakdown here in this 39-second clip, so we'll let you guys hear what the actual quote was.
Should poker players be allowed to wear masks at the table?
That's just a tactic and a strategy. That's not good for poker.
Phil Hellmuth called out Ike Haxton and his use of a mask in a recent interview with Poker.org.
He's one of the best in the world right now, but he has to take that white mask off. He's using it to give himself an advantage.
Hellmuth admitted that he himself had benefited from using a mask, but it was bad for poker.
When there's 6 people left in a tournament, you don't really have any real concerns for COVID.
Phil stated that wearing a mask is way more beneficial for covering up poker tells than anything else.
There are people that are just tell boxes, and maybe Ike Haxton is a tell box.
What do you guys think? Should poker players be allowed to wear masks?
I don't think Ike Haxton is a tell box.
I think there's a very important concept that both Phil and Negreanu need to be aware of. It's the phrase, when you come at the king, you best not miss. If you're going to come at Ike Haxton over something poker related, like, you better have a really fucking good argument for what you're saying, because this guy won $16 million last year.
Right.
So when
That's because
Phil,
of the mask.
Yeah, like when Phil is out there saying that Ike is like, oh, he's got such a big advantage. Like, really? You think that's the reason this guy won $16 million? Like,
I mean, the only difference between Ike's mask and Phil's is that Phil uses his hands.
Yeah. And I don't even think I know what the top of Phil's head looks like, because he wears a baseball cap to cover half his face literally every single time he plays. Yeah.
And sunglasses.
Right. It's crazy. It's really crazy to me.
Yeah, I think it's a really weird out-of-pocket thing.
It's so out of pocket.
It's just wild, because it's like there's really only I don't know. Like, framing it as like it's giving him an advantage at the table, I feel like it's just a projection, where it's like Hellmuth feels a little bit insecure in certain environments, perhaps. Like, maybe he feels a little bit out of a fish out of water in some of these high rollers, and he would prefer to pacify himself by wearing a mask. I mean, a lot of people have this effect. Like, if you're new to the game and you wear sunglasses at the table, you kind of feel invisible, right? And it gives you that passive, that certain pacification where, is that even a word? Where you feel pacified, and you don't feel like you're as nervous. You're not expressing as many tells, whatever your but like, we're talking about the elite of the elite. Like, you're not going to gain an edge off of Ike, and even if you do, I don't know how much EV you're really recouping when he knows the game tree through and through, and like, you're relying on somehow seeing something in his face and guessing based off of like where you've gotten to at this point in the decision tree.
Right.
People that are so confident in their actions don't give tells.
That you literally took the words out of my mouth.
It just doesn't happen.
That's 100% true. It's just like he knows exactly what he's doing. He's not like, oh my god, I have a really big hand. Like, I'm gonna give off a tail. No, he's just like, I have this hand. This is the board. This is the SPR. This is what I do. And then that's it.
You think a guy who's played as much as poker as Ike is like, he's got these Oreo cookie tails on the river. It's like when he's 3x potting as a bluff, he like does a certain thing with his mouth, and then he doesn't do that when he's got value. Like, it's complete bullshit.
It's interesting because like there was like, call it not devil's advocate, but fun point. Makita and Linus played a hand in a live tournament where Linus goes all in on the river, and then Makita looks at Linus, and Linus kind of looks uncomfortable, and Makita's kind of just like, you're making me want to call you right now.
That hand was so great.
He's like, you're making me want to call you because you look uncomfortable, as if you don't know if the bluff is good or not.
Mm-hmm.
Where if you knew it was a good bluff, you wouldn't.
It was
feel
a pretty
that
out of
way.
line hand too. I think it was like ace king high versus like king queen high or something like that.
It was like I think it was a 3-bet pot, and it was like a jack 10x blank 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 run out, and yeah, Linus like check raised and just tripled off, and Makita called down with ace king high, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think there's a difference in what I was saying here, because Linus is strictly plays online mostly, so he's just like,
right.
He's not used to.
And I think that's what Phil's trying to frame Ike as just being like an online guy that somehow he said. So his tweet says, no one should be able to cover their face unless you use your own hands to do it. This isn't online poker. Tells matter in live poker. It is a skill to hide your tells and another skill to read your opponent's tells. And it's like, okay, I'll give you that, right? Let's spot you that one. How much are you gaining? Like, how much less does Ike win last year if he wasn't allowed to wear a mask?
Yeah, this is my point.
I think he wins like $20 more actually.
Whatever the cost of the mask was.
Right.
Yeah,
it's just
about right.
I mean, it's just like it's beyond silly, and this is where, you know, circling all the way back to it's very difficult to age gracefully. This is where I think the conversation comes back to, is like, at the end of the day, nobody should ever question the greatness of Phil Hellmuth, Daniel Negreanu, and what they mean to this game and to this community at large. Like, again, they are the faces of the Mount Rushmore of poker, especially like that, you know, are still around. But whenever you are so displaced while still trying to do the thing that you've been great at for many, many decades, and the advancements have all but passed you by, it feels like an old man shaking their fist at clouds, trying to get everybody to hear you and, you know, basically elevate you and validate you as to being correct as to why you're not performing to the same level that you used to, right? Like, D-Negs is very gracious. He posts his results every single year in and year out, right?
Without rebuys.
No. He whatever. Doesn't matter. He does post them with rebuys. He just doesn't count it towards the ROI. Point is, if you take the time and you look back at like his last 7 years, I think Jason Strausser quote tweeted Negreanu's last 7 years or whatever. It's a net of like $1 million profit, right? And that's not counting the heads up match. So it's actually probably pretty close to break even. When you look at like how many big scores that includes, how many 7-figure final tables and all this other stuff, it's like half of his career earnings in the last 7 years for an ROI of like 3%, which isn't throwing shade. 3% in these high rollers is, a very noble ROI, but it's also like super low volume. So, is he winning 10%? Is he winning 0? We don't really know. Point being is that it's not, $1 million over 7 years. Like, that's a good 8 months in the cash streets. Like, it's not the years of old where for 20 years straight, Daniel and Phil profited $1 million every single year, right? Like, they're playing really highly competitive fields now where, sure, they might be winning like 5 to 10 million a year in cashes, but the total profit might be like a couple $100,000.
And let's also be specific that Daniel's playing these fields. I don't see Phil in the 250K buy-ins, He
sprinkles.
He sprinkles, okay. Because I was wondering, I saw this tweet, and I was wondering, like, when was the last time Phil and Ike actually played the same tournament? Because most of the time when Ike's wearing the mask, it's in high rollers, and Phil's not in those.
Phil will tell you. Phil played and cashed like 11 straight buy-ins of 20. I don't know what the fuck the stats are, but and I'm not trying to say this to slam Phil. Like, look, his competitiveness at this point in his career is admirable. The point is that I'm trying to get at is, like, at some point they have to look themselves in the mirror and say, like, I'm not at the point of being at the top of this field like I used to be, right? Like,
from a play standpoint.
Bro, we play for fucking money. Like, from a sheer return standpoint, if you're not making nearly as much money, like, there are guys playing 10, 20, 40 that are bringing more home a year on average. Like, call a spade a spade. And that's not to say that this is somehow a slight or a shot at their ability. Clearly it's not. They're playing in the most competitive environments in the world. But you at some point have to, like, look yourself in the mirror and say, like, okay, like, this is my golden years. Like, it's my swan song. I'm not playing nearly as much. I have a nice established life here. I still get to be the face of the community. So why don't I do that more actively and with purpose, rather than trying to, uphold this prior image that I've created out of my ego, where I'm just the end all be all of this game. Like, I'm the staple. I'm what people look to when they want to see what a elite poker player looks like. It's like, no, that's Ike, right? Yeah. Like, we've moved on, and rightfully so. Like, that's Ike. That's the next gen of online guys that are now moving into live. And no matter how much you want to take shots at their inability to navigate the social realm or the psychological realm the way that we had to 20 years ago, it doesn't fucking matter anymore, because they know down to a goddamn 10th of a percentage point what frequency they're supposed to be raising each candidate on the flop. And you have no fucking clue. So when that holds true, at some point, you just have to pass the torch. And that's the one thing about this game that I feel is most problematic, where you don't see it in sports, because at some point the body gives out and you just have to move on.
It's fun. In sports, you got to retire.
Yeah, you just have to move on, and you become a legend of the game, right? These guys are legends of the game. They're Hall of Famers. They're so far above the fray that their talent shouldn't matter any longer. And that's not to say that they shouldn't still play. Like, bro, you've earned it. Go out and do your thing. Just, start talking about the soft skills of the game. Start talking about the intricacies of the community, how we can grow. Be an ambassador in that regard. Stop fucking puffing your chest with your results, because they don't matter anymore.
Yeah, and I don't understand the desire to, like, there's always been this, I think, ever since online poker became like a source of some of the best players in the world, there's been this desire to just, like, shit on anybody who came through the online environment, even once they get to the point like Ike has been playing live events for 10 years. Like Ike has been
longer.
Way longer.
Longer than 10
Right.
years, yeah.
He final table PCA in 2006, 2005.
Yeah, like Ike has been around so long at this point. Just because he started online, why is there a desire to like shit on him from people who are older than him? I mean, really don't understand it.
For what it's worth, everybody started online at that point.
Oh yeah.
Like everybody that's like would be considered the new guard, I guess you want to call it, or whatever the hell you want to call it, had started online in like 2000, early 2000s.
It's the same as it's this dismissive thing of people. They used to just be like, oh, the online guys, like they're the online wizards, you know, like they're just like, I think it was Antonio used to say wizards in like a kind of derogatory way, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't get where that comes from, other than just like that impulse, like you say, Buck, of they're getting older. People are coming through who are coming from a different background to them and succeeding in a different way. And there's some kind of weird resentment there, and I don't get it.
I mean, so it looks like Ike's first cash was second in the PCA for 870 in 2007.
Yep.
Yeah. I remember that very well. Our friend John Ford was at that.
Is that when he was? Is that when he was like in the wind, in the rain?
Yeah. It was Ike, Jay Little. Who won that?
Some anonymous, like some random guy who didn't stick around, I think.
No. Ryan Doubt was at that final table.
Ryan Doubt won it.
Oh, he won it.
It was it was Ike versus Ryan Doubt.
Ryan Doubt, Ike Haxton, Robert Ford, Mizraki, Little, Frank Rusnak, Antonio Ribeiro, Scott Clements.
One of the most iconic hands of all time.
The four deuce?
Whatever it was the hand.
Ike bluffed with four deuce.
He's 3-bet bluffs all in with like 3 deuce or 4 deuce or something. And he's like, re-raise, all in.
Yeah.
It's such a great hand.
Yeah, Ryan Dowd had like 8 high or something.
Yeah, it was a great hand.
I mean, you know, just to put a bow on this, I think we didn't really even talk that much about it, but like, it's insane to poke fun at people for what they choose to wear, you know what I mean? Like,
wear whatever you want.
Yeah, like I understand if you're playing like,
unless I wear shorts on the podcast.
Well, that's ridiculous. Those pants are also goddamn ridiculous.
Podcast attire is different to poker table attire. You know?
But yeah, it's like in general, I don't care. I understand like if you're like a cash reg who's playing in the same pool every single day, like you want to kind of encourage people to stop wearing headphones. You want to encourage them to be a little bit more active and social in the environment. But again, that's just like bigger picture stuff. Like, I think that's what Hellmuth was trying to get across, right? Like, to give him the benefit of the doubt, he was saying like, this mask is bad for poker. But then he steered it into a selfish lens of it's bad for poker because Ike could be giving off tells, and his players at the and his competitors at the table should be able to pick up on those tells, yada yada yada. Well, no, like if it's bad for poker, it's only bad for poker in the sense that it looks weird.
I mean, this is kind of bad for poker too, right?
Honestly, no. I think that's great for poker. Like, I think that's great for poker.
Do you think a mask is different?
I don't think a mask. I think it's neutral. I don't think it.
Right.
I don't think it has any. Here's what I think, and I think Hunt has opinions on this too, based off of a tweet he put out. But I think the majority of people who think they know what's good for poker have no fucking clue. Mm-hmm. And this goes from operators all the way down to players. I hear some of the dumbest ideas get thrown out under the guise of it will alienate recreationals if we did something differently. Right? The big blind ante is the easiest one to point to. The World Series was so goddamn slow to adopt it because they were convinced that amateurs would not play in events with big blind antes.
Yeah.
And since the big blind ante, the numbers have only shot up.
Yeah. It's like I think the tweet I put out, I think you're referring to the one where I was like the people who seem to have the most opinions about what poker should or shouldn't do or what's wrong with poker and all these things. They seem to be the people who just don't play a lot. You know, right. I don't see the people who are like playing every day, the guys grinding the high rollers. I don't see them complaining about like, oh, we have to change this. We should change this. This is bad for poker. That's bad for poker. It just seems to be the people, like a lot of people who kind of, you know, maybe they're a recreational player that plays like once a week or, you know, somebody who's, you know, kind of a part-time pro, like not really a full pro that doesn't, you know, they're a businessman or something. They have a lot of strong opinions on what poker should do differently and how the game should change and everything. But the people who actually play the highest volume very rarely seem to express those ideas in terms of all these negative things about poker, you know?
Yeah. Well, speaking of strong opinions, Guapo, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot here a little bit. Dankness just dropped a...
New Dankness drop.
He just dropped the tough convo. I haven't heard it yet, so we're taking a risk here.
Oh boy.
Who's it with? Who's the tough convo with?
I mean,
D-Negs and Phil.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Obviously.
I think we might have to have this tough convo air live here.
I think we might.
Let's just pray it's safe for the children.
It's time.
It's been a minute, but it's time. It's time to have a tough one with two of the greatest, most successful, most famous poker players of all time, Phil Hellmuth and Daniel Negreanu. Look, I don't know if there are two players that have done more to grow poker, increase its popularity. I don't know if there are two more famous poker players in the world than you guys, maybe Phil Ivey, Doyle. But recently, both you guys came after Ike for wearing a mask. Phil, you said he's clearly doing it to gain an edge. And Daniel, you called him out for only taking it off to smoke cigarettes and never going to the gym. I mean, it's pretty obvious what's going on here, guys. Like, you guys have both, for a long time in poker, been seen as two of the best players in the game. Maybe not necessarily always by people within poker, but always by the outside public. You talk about great poker players, Phil Hellmuth, Daniel Negreanu. And you guys are both extremely successful, hardworking, and you both have massive egos. And the truth is you guys ain't the best anymore. Like, I'm sorry, Phil, but you're not even fucking close, man. I mean, if you are, one of the best tournament players in the world, there are big buy-ins running every day of the year. You can play them. You can go to Triton. You can play 100Ks. You can play 200Ks. You're not even remotely close to the level of these guys. And if you were, something tells me you'd be out there winning tournaments. Daniel, I mean, you have done an incredible job, like absolutely phenomenal job. You have, I don't know how you've stayed. It's a testament to your work ethic, to your natural ability, your hand reading skills. The fact that you've been able to have the type of scores in these type of fields over the past few years, I can't give you enough respect. And you deserve to be certainly in the conversation with these guys as long as you keep doing this. But I mean, let's be honest, you guys are sick and tired of Ike and guys like him winning all the money, being better than you. And that's what this is about. It's not about Ike's health. Does anybody even consider that maybe he has some health issues? That maybe that's why he's wearing the mask? Like, is that even a remote possibility? Or it's just for edge and to block his carotid artery or something? What did I just say?
That's almost how you say that.
So good.
Man, I was just about to say that was the most serious tough convo I think
he
he's
had to end it with
he ended it nicely.
Yeah.
I love making a 3-minute video and ending it with, what did I just say? It's fantastic.
I thought that was a really good job of summarizing kind of the overarching point. Like, at some point, man, like, just enjoy the spoils of your labor. Like, you guys have done it. You're everything that we all aspire to be and will never actually get to achieve. So the next best thing we can do is try to be really fucking good at this game and make a bunch of money. Like, that's our only hopes. None of us, maybe not even Ike included, are going to make that Mount Rushmore of poker. None of us are going to make hundreds of millions based off of what we've done in poker, right? And like, by all accounts, Hellmuth and Daniel have, right, through the sponsorships and the other deals that they've been able to wield. That's not going to happen for us. So like, you guys have that on lock. No one's coming for the throne, but we're going to get really good at the fucking game and try to make more money.
And then they're going to get mad at you for it.
Yeah. And like, we're going to point out whenever people who aren't very good at the game are like talking out of pocket, because that's the right that we've earned in putting in a lot of work. But I digress. Speaking of people who have put in a lot of work and are excellent at the game, Jason Koon made an announcement today that he and GG have gone their separate ways. He just put out a very simple statement saying, "I wish them continued success." This, I guess, I had kind of seen the writing on the wall, just having talked to Jason. He's not a very public guy. He's doing his thing behind the scenes. He's getting to play, wherever it is that he's getting to play. And I think that especially more recently. I don't know how much the most recent stuff with GG weighed on his decision, but I imagine whenever you're getting your feet held to the fire, when you're just basically off Twitter 24/7, and people are calling for answers like, "What's going on? Why are you not speaking on?" You know,
I cannot speak. If I speak, I'm in big trouble.
Do you know where that comes from?
Yeah, soccer.
Yeah, okay. You have been so indoctrinated of like all the memes that come from soccer just because you spend so much time with pads. It's great. Yeah. It's so great.
But yeah, like, you know, for Jason, I think it's a lot of like what we just spoke to, where I imagine he has a new family. He's done really well for himself. He probably just doesn't want to deal with this shit anymore, you know? And it takes a lot to be a proper ambassador, not just for the site that you're representing, but, you know, for the community as a whole, once you're put into that situation of power, which he seems to be being replaced by Fedor.
Usurped?
Usurped.
It's not usurped.
Yeah,
not really usurped.
I don't know that he like cut his head off.
Usurped implies that there was some sort of coup by Fedor, where he's like managed to get Jason out and install himself. You know,
Fedor announced.
Maybe that's what happened.
I'm excited to announce my new role as Poker Integrity Ambassador for GG. Which, for what it's worth, I don't know that was necessarily Jason's role prior. I don't know. This, for all accounts, I think is like a new label. But you know, we'll see. Ensuring fair play and security will be my top priority. I'm in direct contact with the security team and will involve myself more in the processes and directly contribute to enhance the security of the games on GG. I understand that the current environment comes with a lot of challenges in that regard with advancing technology, but I believe it's of utmost importance to continuously improve security on online poker sites. I'll do my best and support and further that cause. So this is kind of a big thing because
just make sure to keep your cards secure if you're a live reg against Fedor.
Huh?
He's referencing the whole looking at people's cards thing with Fedor.
Right.
Yeah,
right, because if you're a reg, he won't tell you.
Let's not go down that rabbit hole.
Man, bad timing. Bad timing to appoint this guy the fucking ambassador of all things secure.
No, I think he's going to do a great job. And
yeah,
I think
for the
great.
recreationals.
I actually missed that combo.
No, I do think that Fedor is a really good choice here. He's been involved with GG for a number of years. And I'm not sure, for what it's worth, I'm not sure how much this has to do with the Poker Integrity Council. Right, so he's a new Poker Integrity Ambassador. What happened at the council?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. Like, did it ever do anything?
Is there even a council?
Was it ever a thing?
Is Jason still on the council?
Who's he ambassading?
I can ask Chewy. Right. I can ask Chewy today on Valleys.
Was he on the council?
Chewy's on the council.
Okay.
Chewy, Nikki P.
Okay.
Not.
Wait, Chewy was really on it?
Yeah. Fedor, Chewy, Nikki P, Koon, Davies.
Okay, so
I really want to know if they ever did anything.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem is that it's very smart for us to have a Poker Integrity Council. It's very poor for it to be overseen by an operator. Like the true Poker Integrity Council, for what it's worth, in my opinion, is everybody that's in the high stakes Discord that's currently working together to speak to these ambassadors, to speak to heads of security, the guys that we had on this panel, like Pads and Matt Marinelli. Like, that truly is the group that's representing the community as a whole. And that's no shade at like Nikki P or Fedor or anybody else that's a part of like the orchestrated council. It's just they clearly don't have much power.
What does it mean?
Right. And who do they represent and what can they do? Right.
What do you mean?
Right. Like, well, like they don't represent a specific group. They don't play online much anymore. Almost everybody on that council doesn't really play online. Where the high stakes Discord, they all are figureheads in very big aspects of the online community. So, you know, at one drop of a hat through that Discord channel, they can encourage, you know, these massive staking pools to just like stop putting their liquidity on certain sites, and that will happen, and that will affect the bottom line of those sites. Therefore, change will occur. We've already seen change occur at GG with the rake policy. We saw a response out of ACR. We saw a response out of GG after the super user. Like, don't overlook how much power there actually is in being I don't want to say unionized, but like being brought together whenever you represent the larger pool as a whole, right? Like they're a small collection of people, maybe only 100, 150 people, but they represent the larger pools as a whole, far more so than the Integrity Council does. And that's no shade at them, right? It's just that they aren't really armed with anything.
Yeah.
Right. So what can you do?
Yeah. Listen, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I remember when ACR signed Randy, I think maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, to be head of security over at ACR.
Yeah.
And you took the words right out of my mouth. It sounds and it feels like it was more of a figurehead thing, because look what's happened over the last year and a half. I just certainly hope it's not the same thing with Fedor. I don't know how involved he'll be with the security stuff, but I don't know. I don't give it a lot of faith, not yet.
I feel like Randy put out a statement saying that he's going to help and do a lot of things and like be more open to the community. I haven't seen his Twitter since.
Yeah, I don't even know if I don't even think Randy's still a part of ACR. I could be wrong, but I know there were talks of him walking away at the beginning of this year. In any event, like I think that's a great example of like how this can go wrong, because I totally agree. I think there was minimal to no communication between Randy and the community. I think that we have very little trust and belief that he was actually operating on our best benefit, or was able to make sweeping change in the back rooms. Whether or not Fedor can is to be seen. Go ahead.
I guess the issue is when it comes to something like poker software or like new game software, poker software can't just tell you new patch notes as to like security updates and like what's happened and like who they've caught. Where in like gaming instances, it's like, oh, like this is a bug that we fixed. This is something that we fixed.
Yeah.
Again, you know, we talked about this. There's ways that they could be messaging better to the community. They don't have to
like through
through Fedor, first of all, now that he's representative of this, but also like, yes, they can. I mean, for a long period of time, like, I don't know if you recall, but when Pads was a part of Party Poker, they put out like a monthly letter of every bot that they caught, every dollar of refunds that they put back.
So why could they do that, but other sites?
It's not a matter of can or can't. It's a matter of will or won't. Yeah. They just choose not to because it's bad PR. Or
is it though?
Well, they believe it to be. And again, this is like the whole.
It's the same WSOP believes Big Blind Ante is bad.
What's good for poker, right? Like, there's this whole aspect to these operators that they believe that their marketing is fixed, right? Like it's just concrete and will never move. This works, that doesn't. That
they don't want to shine more light on the cheating or more light on things that could be going wrong.
Right, because it seems
the
like
back end,
it'll hurt the acquisition model.
Right, yeah.
But at some point, when everybody's shouting from the rooftops that there's cheating, it's important to fucking acknowledge it, right? Like you can't just turn a blind eye to it and say like, we're never going to make a statement on this because it hurts the acquisition model. It's like, well, you know what else hurts the acquisition model?
People not playing.
All of your community that's actually investing in you saying like we don't trust.
It is funny to think like when you say like everybody's shouting and like maybe it's not everybody. Maybe the people that are shouting is a small group. The community, the poker community is a small group, and that compared to everybody that plays online, like there's a lot of people that just play.
Yeah, that can be true,
and are like kind of like out of it.
Sure, that can be true, but that means that what you're saying is that the new acquisition model doesn't come through Twitter, which means that Twitter can now be a very viable landscape for you to message.
Yeah,
right. You could just share your message on Twitter and Twitter alone, and let your emails.
You just say, hey, like we did this caught these cheaters, because it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'm not saying to email people who have a free account saying like, hey, we just caught a dozen cheaters on our site. You want to deposit? Like, no, of course, that'd be dumb. But like, you know, putting the information out publicly saying like, look, we're diligent and we are doing our damnedest to make sure that this problem gets corrected. You know, like ACR, I don't want to get too much into it because I don't know necessarily all the details, but like we're coming up on a month since that bot ring was caught, and not one single refund to my knowledge has been issued.
Yeah, I think there's also a real issue that occurs with a lot of like corporate entities and stuff these days when there's some kind of a PR problem, which is that they assume that what happens on social media isn't happening in the real world, right? Like if people are mad at something on social media, it doesn't matter because that's not the real world, right? Like, and so poker sites are like, oh, well, there's a lot of talk on Twitter about all this cheating. Like, oh, it doesn't count because, you know, that's not what I'm actually seeing when I talk to people, or it's not what our customers are actually saying to us in person. But these days, social media is such a big driver of what the narratives are across all of society that you have to pay attention to it. If something is going on social media where everybody's talking about how your company fucked up, like that's a problem.
Right. Yeah. I don't know that there's a great parallel to this pre-technology, pre-internet or whatever. But you're right. It's like drowning out the voices of your community and just saying like they don't matter. They don't represent the whole, right? Even if social media is just a part of the whole, in a lot of instances, they do actually represent the collective, and that does become critical. And I think like WSOP is a great example of a company that maybe it may be begrudgingly, but they do listen, right? They may do it like with their head in their hands saying like, I'm so sick of these guys. All they do is complain every year, but
fucking Twitter guys.
Right. But they hear the messages and they do their damnedest to make adjustments. Whether sometimes it takes a year, right? Like sometimes they can't correct a schedule once it's released or once it's mid being played and we find a bunch of issues with it, right? But the following year they try to do better. And I think that like companies that take that sort of feedback are companies that we should be investing a lot more in. And it does seem like GG's trying to make that step forward, way more so than maybe others in the space.
At the cost of admin fees.
Right. Well, we'll see.
That's where the admin fee goes, I guess.
Is it? No, it goes to WSOP.
I'm just fucking around.
Your memes are so like
don't
nuanced.
Be mad at me that you're not nuanced enough.
It's not, bro. If I don't get it, the audience doesn't get it. I can promise you that. Brian didn't get it. He just gave you a courtesy laugh. He's in your shot.
No, what am I supposed to do?
Unbelievable,
guys. There's so many good tweets going around.
Go on.
Dan Smith just posted the PokerOrg video, and he writes, "This gives me Dylan Brooks shit talking LeBron vibes."
Yeah, that's again.
Do you know that one? You don't know?
I do because I follow sports, but most of the audience probably gonna miss that one. All you need to know: LeBron, GOAT. Dylan Brooks,
getting there.
Not really. It's a little unfair though because he's calling Hellmuth Dylan Brooks in this instance. Like, come on.
Lewis Spencer, we didn't get to that one either.
Oh yeah, the Lewis Spencer tweet was funny.
We showed that.
I put it up.
He says, "I've always thought we need less people in mass and more people entering the tournament area dressed as Poseidon with a marching band during day 2 of 100K."
It's all about what's good for poker, Conrad.
I know.
Okay.
It's good for poker.
What if everybody for day 2 marching as Poseidon, all together?
He wasn't dressed as Poseidon, guys. He was dressed as Aquaman. Come on.
Sure.
It was Aquaman in that crappy $5 costume. That's what he looked like.
Yeah.
Jungle Man was Poseidon. That's right.
That's right. Yeah. He pulled it off really well. Yeah. I mean, we can put a bow on this and into here, but I will say when it comes to this notion of what's good for poker, I kind of just want to re-echo what I said earlier, and I wish that like specifically Daniel and Phil, because I do think they have the biggest platforms. I think they have the loudest voices. I wish they actually did spend the majority of their energy on social media, like whatever little bit of energy they put towards it. I wish the majority of it was with the thought like in the back of their brain of, is this growing the game? Is this good for the whole of the game?
It's tough, man.
Rather than, is this good for my ego right now?
Yeah, but that's the tough part, right? Is because then they probably need 2 Twitters. They need like a Finsta, right? Like a fake Twitter.
Yeah, let them get a fucking alt, man. Let them get an alt with no followers and just shout into the ether, and then they'll realize how dumb it is.
Like Kevin Durant. It's good to get the alt account.
I didn't know he had an alt. I thought he just tweeted from Maine.
No, he has an alt
account. No, but like the point being is like it's tough to be the guy and then have people criticize you, and then when you have a platform like Twitter, not say anything. For someone like Daniel. So even anyone. It's almost like at some point, some people feel like they need to, some people don't.
I'm definitely not arguing that he shouldn't defend himself and stand up for himself. I think he should. Like, I hope that it's not lost how many positive things we're saying about the two of them and what they've accomplished, right? It's just more so holding them to a higher standard. And
in regards to the dunk tweets or like...
I think that's what it comes down to is like, at the end of the day, we're holding them to this really high standard that they don't want to be held to.
Is that our fault?
No. I mean, yes, I guess, right? But like...
It's like they're just a guy.
No, I get that. But this isn't the Charles Barkley, I'm not your role model type of stuff because...
Too old for my time.
Okay, fine. But the point is that when you do shit like this, where you walk in with a microphone holding a Darth Vader costume, you've forced yourself onto us. to look to you as
you leave us no choice.
Yeah, as a leader in this space, right?
He's something in this space.
And obviously, like, I'm not implying that this is reflective of somebody who's a leader in the space, but what I am implying is that, like, this is attention grabbing.
That looks like a mask to me.
That's definitely a mask.
You think?
Wow. The funny thing is, though, like, you know it's Phil, because who the hell else would do that? Who the hell else would show up dressed as Darth Vader?
You're telling me that Phil wore a mask in the 10K main event?
That's actually against the rules. You're not allowed to fully cover.
Yeah, you can't conceal your identity.
This is ridiculous. I can't believe it.
Think about all that edge he's gaining after busting day
so
one.
much edge.
Sure.
That Darth Vader costume's really giving him an edge.
Yeah, it's huge. Huge edge. But what I'm getting at is, like, when you are put in that position, you have two choices, I think. I think that you can either gracefully accept it and do your best to represent the community and try to, you know, grow it and kind of give back to the community that put you in this spot to begin with, or you can vanish, right? You can just do what Ivy does and just be the guy without ever saying a fucking peep. I think what the problem is we're getting something in between. We're getting something where it's like, well, I want to be me, I want to be real, I want to be raw and authentic, but I'm also a little bit of a dick and an egomaniac at the core. So I'm going to lead with my worst self and then claim that I'm trying to grow the game. And that in particular, I think kind of sucks, right? And I think, like, the vantage point that I'm speaking from is not one where it's like, well, if roles were reversed, I would do things differently. That's, I mean, who knows? I might fall victim to the same things. It's more so as somebody who's much smaller than them in the community that has to look up. It's tough to always see a boot coming down on your head.
Yeah, this is the more the Batman quote keeps coming real. You know,
you either die a hero or you see yourself become the villain.
Right.
Because, like, at some point, you know, like, game passes you by, you see a bunch of people that are really young and getting good, and it's like, well, I'm better than these guys. Like, well, are you?
Bro, everyone's so fucking good.
Poker's hard.
Poker's hard. Wear a helmet. Move on. All right. We are going to get into strat chat for today.
Imagine wearing a hard hat to the poker table.
Yeah. Speaking of wearing a helmet, Hunt made a final table at the Venetian.
We did.
And ran into quite the pickle against one Jeremy Becker. The chosen one, if you will.
He really is the chosen one. At least the deck has chosen him in some level, but he obviously plays good too. Like, he played really good at this final table, so I don't want to take anything away from him.
Okay, so we're going to be examining ICM from this final table. If you want to, like, just lay out the framework, payouts, chip placement, all the things that are relevant.
Sure.
You and Landon then can nerd out, because this is definitely not my lane.
Not your arena. All right.
Not my
cool.
lane. When you guys get back to Chip EV, let me know.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is we're going to run this. We're only going to be able to run this on Wizard through Chip EV, like the actual post-flop sim with Chip EV, and I'll just discuss what the ICM sim that I ran last night for myself actually said. But it's a very interesting spot because of how ICM changes it. So essentially what happens is we are one of the middle stacks at this 9-handed final table. There was about 5,700 for ninth, and there's 57,000 for first. So, you know, obviously decently sized event, $800 buy-in. Jeremy is to my direct right, and we have about 35 bigs. He has about 45 to 50. So he's the chip leader, but we're not that far behind. So we have about 2.8 million at 40K, 80K blinds.
How many players are left, Matt?
9. We're still at the beginning of the final table, basically. And we get dealt 2 black 6s under the gun. And we opened to 2.5x. The reason being that with the chip leader in the big blind, you kind of usually want to open a bit bigger just to make it harder for them to defend and to sort of counter the fact that you end up having to play really passively post-flop against them. So we open at 2.5. It folds around. There are a couple of short stacks. There's, I think, 1 7 or 8 big blind stack and a couple of 12, 14, 15 big blind stacks. So some pretty heavy ICM going on. And when I ran the HRC sim for this, my risk premium against Jeremy is about 17%. So pretty high.
Yeah.
It's pretty tough for me to get it in against him. But by the same token, you know, my stack can hurt him quite a bit as well. So he can't exactly just fire it off against me aimlessly. You know, he still has to be conscious of the stack that I have. So it's an interesting spot. We open 2.5, like I say, he defends. And he defends after using a time extension, which I thought was interesting because obviously that kind of places his range in kind of a territory where he's more likely to either be defending something that's right at the fringe of his defending range in terms of defend versus fold, or something that he might consider mixing 3-bets with at some frequency. So interesting spot to see him use a time extension. He calls, and the flop comes 9-6-5 with 2 hearts and 1 diamond. So we flop middle set on a board that also allows for a flop straight. And if I scroll back to the flop, I have the turn up here on Wizard. So let's go back to the flop. What I've done is I've actually locked it as a range lead for him on the flop here. And the reason for that is, number one, that's what he did in practice. He leads for 125K into 520K. And the second reason I've done this is because when I ran the ICM sim for this on PO, leading his entire range is exactly what he's supposed to do here. So it's a really interesting spot where the ICM factors involved heavily shift this board to being one where he gets to play a lot of offense. He has a really big risk advantage over me. He gets to lead range. And part of the reason why he gets to lead range is I am basically not allowed to play raises here. The ICM sim had me pretty much calling 90%, folding 10%, and never raising. So I've basically replicated that in the Chip EV sim here as well. And it's a pretty straightforward flop spot as a result. It's relatively clear what my continuing range is going to have to be on flop. It's basically anything that has reasonable equity against a quarter pot bet, just folding a lot of clubs and spades basically, and then continuing with a lot of ace highs and flush draws and all that stuff. But I don't get to raise anything. So we've locked in those two things. And now we get to the turn, which is the king of diamonds. And before we start discussing the turn, I guess I want to just turn to Landon a little bit and see if you have any thoughts about the ways in which ICM is going to influence this sort of situation, and whether that idea of like leading boards like this with your entire range, is this something that you feel like you've seen in some of the sims that you've run as well?
Yeah, so most spots when you're chip leader and you defend and board comes pretty low or paired to your advantage, call it the non-ace high or king high dry boards, you're going to have a lot of leads as chip leader because the other person being in position is not incentivized to put in chips against you.
Exactly.
For the most part.
Yeah, so that's really what it's going to come down to, that if he did check his entire range here, I would be doing very little c-betting.
You just check back almost pure.
Yeah, it probably would be. I didn't run a version of it where I forced him to check everything because that's not what he did. But I think he recognizes in game here that ICM incentivizes him to be doing a ton of leading. I did expect him to maybe not necessarily lead his entire range here, but certainly lead a lot. And I wasn't surprised to see it. And I immediately, as soon as I saw that lead, I recognized that this is a spot where I don't get to raise, right? I don't get to put in raises here because I have very few hands which want to actually stack off here. I don't really want to stack off with my overpairs. They're not good enough to stack off with the ICM influences here. And I don't have a set of 5s. So I literally only have set of 9s and set of 6s that can stack off. I don't have 8-7 suited. This range here that I've locked for myself or given for myself on the in the pre-flop phase is pretty much an exact representation of the range that the HRC sim gave me. It did want to fold 6s quite a lot pre-flop. It was right on the borderline, but I opened it in practice thinking that this would be the worst pair that I would open. So it might be pretty marginal, but in any case, the sim that we've got here pretty accurately represents what I got from the ICM sims that I ran. I open, he defends, he leads his entire range, and we call. And then we get this King of Diamonds turn, which is a really interesting card. Before I check out what the strategy actually looks like for him here in the Chip EV version on Wizard, what kind of approach would you expect him to be playing here, Landon? Or what would you expect to see from the sim?
I think it's another spot where, once again, the reason why chip leader leads is because gun 9 isn't trying to put chips in the pot. So on a king turn, gun 9's gonna have some king X's, but once again, those aren't gonna try to stack off or put them in chips.
Gun 9?
Yeah, it's under the gun 9.
Under the gun 9. He's doing that thing that young people do where they shorten everything.
Right.
Gun 9.
So anyways, like, he's not trying to put in like king queen for multiple streets as well. Being like you're not trying to get in king x for multiple streets. You're kind of cool with winning the pot now and like a check small bet if board is clean for you.
Yeah.
But I think turn strategy for him is going to be a good amount of small bets. Like he still wants to protect and get value from some of his 9x, some of his 6x with the draw, some of his 5x, like 5x, 7-5 off typed hands. And then he probably has a polar size as well if you're giving two sizes where he has two pairs, he has straights, and he's just trying to bin you when you have king x.
Interesting. So that's a little bit, it's a bit different to what I saw both from the chip EV sim and from the ICM sim. So if I bring up the chip EV sim here on the turn, if I can just get that to come up, the chip EV sim wants him to check at a very high frequency. So I've given a 10%, a 2/3, and it's obviously got the all in.
Sure.
It wants to use basically 2/3 or check, but it doesn't really want to bet very often. The ICM sim that I ran wants him to basically 2/3 or check. It never wanted to really use a small size. And I think it has a little bit to do with the fact that even against a small size, a lot of my hands have pretty easy folds, and a lot of them still have pretty easy continues. Like the king x, the pairs, the flush draws, the straight draws, etc. All of that stuff is going to have an easy continue against a small size, and a lot of other stuff is going to have an easy fold. I think that's my suspicion here. The interesting thing is that in practice, what he did was he bet 10%. He bet 80K, he bet one big blind into about 770K. So just over 10%, basically.
Yeah, I just feel like if I was choosing a small size, I'd try to be targeting like the offsuit ace-x with a heart.
Yeah, like
with a heart.
That's the stuff that he can maybe target here, like the ace-jack offsuit, one heart.
Ace-jack, ace-queen, ace-10. And I think I'll just choose a little bit bigger of a size because versus that size, it's nearly a check. So like there's just, I guess, a little bit of a difference between trying to force indifference from that versus signal a check.
Yeah. So it was definitely an interesting spot for me, and I had to, in order to get a reasonable read out of the ICM sim, I had to actually node lock him to be betting 10% at like a quarter of frequency or some kind of a frequency that made sense, because it was a 0% frequency play in the ICM sim that I ran. So when I did that, we got a result that I'll talk about in a second. But I think the interesting question here as well is once he does bet the 10% size in practice, if we think maybe that's a size that isn't necessarily that likely to appear in theory, what's your instinct about what you think would be good to raise against that size here? Because we obviously have some hands that want to stack off, but we don't have a lot, and the exact threshold is a little bit unclear.
Yeah, tough one. I think I'll just check back by check back, I mean call the one big blind with pairs between the 9 and the king. So like 10s, jacks, queens. Don't really see much incentive to put a raise in, as you can just call a bet on the river, hopefully, or check back and win. Because end of the day, if river's a blank, goes check, and you have queens and win, that's a good result for you.
Yeah, it's a great result.
I think that there's some king x that the real issue here is like, not that your hand isn't good enough, but if you're not good, you're risking a lot by getting 9th instead of being top 3 in chips or whatever you were at the time.
Yeah.
So the hands you probably want to raise are hands that you're kind of cool with raise folding if you somehow get click 3-bet on. I would say a hand like that being, I guess, aces. If you have it, you unblock the king, but maybe ace king's just better because you block 2 pair. But like then again, like raise folding this feels really nasty. I think I'd still be okay with it though. And then we're still gonna have sets that we want to put money in with. So I guess you mirror that with some decent equity flush draws as well, that you can get some folds from, call it 9x or 6x or whatever he's doing with that portion of range. And then if he finds somehow like a jam on you and you have not that great of a flush draw, like it's okay to find a fold. But I wouldn't want to use like nut flush draws for this.
Yeah. So what was really interesting here, I'm just bringing up the chip EV version here in a second so we can check it out. But what was really interesting here in the ICM sim that I saw was that even though the raise size that I used in game was I raised to 525K with my set of sixes, which is about a half pot raise. So even though it's a half pot raise, the ICM sim actually wanted to be very polar with what it raised, in that it was only raising 2-pair plus for value, and then it was bluffing with like a lot of the stuff that was like ace 10 diamond heart, ace jack diamond heart, a few of the flush draws, but not a ton of them, and a little bit of like the ace 8 of clubs type stuff that just has like a gut shot that doesn't care about folding to the 3-bet jam. But it was doing a pretty minimal amount of raising, even versus a 10% bet that was coming from a range that was a bit wider than what it should be in practice. So the ICM sim was like basically saying, yeah, you have some hands that want to stack off because you have a set of kings, a set of nines, a set of sixes. King 9 suited is in there as well, but it didn't want to stack off wider than that. Like ace king was almost pure just call for the ICM sim here. Whereas if we look at this chip EV, do we have that on the... Yeah, there we go. Okay. If we look at this chip EV sim, you can see that it's much more happy to raise, right? The chip EV sim is happy to raise like king 8. It's raising like 8s and 7s at some rate. It's happy to raise like king queen off at some rate.
It's
king,
just
queen
concentrated
suited.
on getting max value for its hand.
Precisely, yeah. It's very focused on being completely okay with stacking off with a king. But the ICM version that I ran on PO didn't want to do that, right? It was much more narrow in terms of how willing it was to get it in here, because it's just so much more easy for Jeremy in ICM to be able to just pile a ton of pressure on me, and put me in a lot of really tough spots when, you know, if I was raising like ace king of clubs here and, you know, he jams, like it sucks. It's a really annoying spot if he just jams there because of how easy it is for him to have a bunch of hands that have tons of equity against ace king of clubs, right?
Can you elaborate why that sucks? Because with one to come, obviously those hands in a chip EV sense are printing money.
Yeah.
Right? So if those hands are printing money in a chip EV sense, it's not like as if in an ICM scenario, Jeremy's range can be morphed into something that puts those hands in a negative EV scenario for chips.
Right.
But obviously, in tournaments, we're not specifically playing for chips. So why do we want to pass on these situations that are printing money in chips?
It's all about the risk premium. So with my risk premium being 17% against Jeremy here, calling off my stack is going to require me to have a much higher threshold of equity against the range that gets it in.
So when your risk premium is 17%, you basically need to have 17% more equity than chip EV to continue.
Exactly. That's what it means.
Okay.
Now in this spot, because there's already a certain amount in the pot, and I'd be risking all of my remaining stack, but it's not all of the stack that I started the hand with. The risk premium that's placed on me for actually calling it off once I get jammed on here is not quite going to be at exactly
right.
17%.
You'll measure it based off of when you raise.
Yeah.
So like you can see that the
Precisely.
raising threshold here might be something in the neighborhood of like 55% equity.
Yeah.
Whereas like now in ICM, you might need something like closer to 70%.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah.
it basically is going to shift the threshold for hands that want to raise up. It's going to shift the threshold for hands that want to call it off up. And it's also going to mean that a much greater region of hands is in a spot where they really don't want to allow Jeremy to rejam and just put them in a nightmare spot by being all in. So realizing equity becomes really important, and even missing out on the opportunity to potentially win a bigger pot with a hand like ace king of clubs is fine because of the burden that ICM places on us, basically.
How do you take this in game? So you obviously don't know that it's 17% in this situation.
Sure.
How do you estimate this in game to kind of figure out what that threshold is?
I think that what tends to happen the most for me in game is that you kind of shift from you think about the region of hands that's going to be like reluctantly getting it in chip EV. That region of hands that reluctantly gets it in chip EV is now not getting it in ICM a lot of the time when there's a lot of pressure on you. And the stuff that is happily getting it in chip EV starts to reluctantly get it in. So it's almost like you kind of calibrate based off of how comfortable it feels in chip EV to get these hands in, and just that basic awareness of this hand is a clear get in versus this hand is like a frustrated get in.
Is that partly why you didn't play flop raise?
No, I played no flop raises because I was very confident that ICM would not want me to play flop raises.
I see.
That I need to have my sets in my calling range to protect, because if I don't have sets in my calling range is massively vulnerable against all the aggression I expect to face from
Yeah,
him.
because
on
look what
later
Ace
streets.
King does.
Right.
Right.
Precisely.
So,
yeah. So I deliberately, I knew immediately as soon as he led the flop, I was like, I've run these spots. I know I play no flop raises here because the ICM burden on me is too high for me to ever be able to bluff raise flop, and it's also too high for me to ever be able to stack off with anything other than a set there. Like if I raised like aces on flop and he jams, like aces just isn't doing well enough to call off in ICM there.
Yeah, that's really important to conceptualize, is that you have to, since your check back, since your hands that continue need to be so much stronger, then your protected check back range also needs to be so much stronger.
Yeah, exactly. You can't. I can't just like keep raising my overpairs and then when he jams on me, think, oh shit, now I have to fold. Like it would be even more of a disaster to just raise fold aces here. So I'm just playing pure call because I know that my range just doesn't want to play any raises at all.
It's interesting to me because you mentioned that your bluffs would perform poorly based on the ICM pressure, and I would think the opposite. I would think that your value would suffer the most, and that your bluffs would actually, because of the risk premium, kind of benefit you more, in the sense that you have to play fewer streets with them, and you get to realize the equity at a greater rate whenever you come through a raise. But it's coming at the cost of your value just getting absolutely obliterated.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just looking at it from the perspective of, if I can't raise for value, I also can't bluff. You know,
right?
Exploitatively, you could make an argument of like, oh, I can have some bluff raises there, but the problem is that this is it's a board where his range has such good equity anyway that it's really hard for me to even raise and play later streets effectively, because it's super difficult to just. Like if I raise something on the flop that I'm bluffing with, it's extremely hard to just blast off against a completely uncapped range on this board when he chip leads, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So I'm just playing complete defense, playing a pure call on flop and folding like 10% of the time. And then when he plays 10% on the turn, I kind of recognize that I have some hands that have to raise. I do have some two pairs, and it's basically the threshold is where he's like, I'm happy that he's getting it in for value with worse hands, right? So in chip EV, when I raise, he's going to get it in for a pot-sized jam, probably with, oh, it doesn't actually, okay, that's interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to only allow him to 10% on turn. I'm going to get rid of that 66%, and it's going to pretty much have him 10% or check. And this is hopefully going to give him a bit more of a well-rounded range. Oh, at least he's got 4%. Okay.
Nah, yeah, you bet less because you're always getting continued on.
Right. Yeah, I guess so. So at least now he has some kind of a range where he jams. Yeah. Okay. So 9% of the time, and when he does jam, it's going to be, look at the filters down here. It's going to be basically straight sets, two pairs, and then he's got some combo draws, nut flush draws, some stuff like that is jamming here. The straights are obviously going to be pretty vulnerable, so it makes sense to jam those. But yeah, he's jamming a bunch of draws here in chip EV, and obviously that's why if he does jam, and we're looking at pure chip EV, we're calling it off with like king 8, because we've got pair plus gut shot. We're calling it off most of the time with ace king, depending on exactly which combo we have. Aces is pretty happy, except when we have diamond heart, because we block all the flush draws. So we're pretty happy getting it in with one pair here. We're even raise calling it off with like, ace 9 of, well, oh no, ace 9 of spades is folding. Never mind.
It's interesting to me that a dynamic is created where you're not meeting MDF.
Well, MDF, the existence of risk premium completely fucks with MDF.
Oh, like, well, I just meant we were looking at the chip EV sim there. When he jams, we're only calling half the time, getting 2 to 1.
Oh, yeah. Well, that is MDF, right? He's betting pot. We only have to defend half the time.
Yeah. Sorry. I was thinking 33% of the time.
Yeah. No, that's
the pot odds.
Yeah,
sorry.
Exactly. So, there we go. We've got MDF up on the screen. Thank you, Guapo.
So you're exactly reaching
Yeah,
MDF.
we're pretty much exactly reaching MDF
yeah.
precisely. Yeah.
Good link for it too.
Yeah. So
nice job.
That's funny. So the next thing becomes, we're gonna have a very a very polar raising range, even though we're using only a 50% raise sizing, and it's because we don't necessarily have the ability to just go geometric with intent to get it in on the river, because there's going to be quite a lot of river cards where even our turn value raise range doesn't want to get it in, right? Like we don't want to go thin on a river diamond, river heart, river 7, river 8. even like a river 10 where he can have like stuff like queen jack of hearts, that's not, it's not ideal to just like rip with a set on the river and expect to get called by 2 pair, because it's just, you know, he has a risk premium too. You know, he doesn't want to risk like a big chunk of his chips as well. So ICM incentivizes a pretty medium-sized kind of raise from me here. And obviously he does have a chunk of hands that jam. And in practice, what ended up happening is he does jam. You know, we snapped it off. He has the king 8 of hearts and drills the jack of hearts on the river, and we get 9th. So that was a rough one to see. I was a little surprised he jammed king 8 of hearts. Honestly, I was a little surprised because I feel like that hand has enough showdown value that you don't necessarily need to jam it when you have a king plus all that equity.
It seems like that's the type of hand that you would want to put into a range that calls and then open rips a lot of rivers.
That could very possibly be the case. Yeah. I also it does. Oh, wow. In Chippy V, it actually does jam. But I guess in Chippy V, I guess why it jams in Chippy V is probably because it can put like ace king in a tough spot, right? Like
it doesn't really exist, but sure.
What do you mean?
Like it's like proportional range wise.
Oh yeah. I just mean like if he does end up there, it does. I guess it's mixing, so yeah, it doesn't really exist. So you're right. It's not really super important. But basically the lens through which jamming king 8 of hearts on the turn makes the most sense is if he thinks I can raise like ace king of spades on turn, and then he can fold. Yeah, and then he can like make that stuff fold. But I would never raise ace king of spades on the turn there.
You would have to expect a huge blunder, in which case now you're almost jamming king 8 suited for value because you think you could make such big blunders.
Yeah, right. So like I like I say, I was a little surprised. I was surprised by the 10% on the turn, and I was a little surprised by the jam with king 8 of hearts. It felt maybe a little bit like he sort of, like I say, like either he expected me to raise like a king and be in a shitty spot when he jams, or he maybe just like wasn't exactly sure which line this hand is supposed to play through and just figured like I have tons of equity, I'm just going to be all in.
I think the latter is what tends to happen, and these are really great learning moments.
Because I have infinite equity moments?
Yeah, like these situations where you have hands that like they're hard to misplay because they're so high up in your equity distribution, that what ends up happening is you take a line that may feel a little bit obscure or off, and you just live with it because it's the easiest decision and you have so much equity you don't care.
I have a pair plus a flush draw. How bad can it be?
Right.
But this is my last couple in the mocks, right?
Exactly.
I was going to say, this is my every session.
And the thing is that the more that you run it with those hands, you won't be punished because it's not about those hands. Those hands do have enough equity where you can't misplay them.
Right.
The reason why they're critical hands is because they're keystones to your overall strategy, right? How you choose to play the rest of your strategy should be reflective of those hands. And the issue is that the rest of your strategy is not going to possess equity that's such a layup.
Yeah, I think part of why in his spot I wouldn't be jamming king 8 of hearts here is because if you jam your king X of hearts, then every time you call and the river comes a heart, you never have flushes anymore because it's really hard to just bet call, except for maybe if you have 5x of hearts. But then I would prefer to jam 5x of hearts and call king X of hearts, right? Because his king X is way better of a bluff catcher than 5x. So
the issue when you jam a hand like this is when you do get called, you're going to have equity, but you always get it in behind.
That's going to be true pretty much of a 3-bet jam range here, I think, with the exception of like his nuts. And that's the issue that I think he's running into that's the worst is...
he's putting a merged hand into a polar line.
Sort of.
Well, King X of showdown. His bluff should be like 7x of hearts.
Obviously, you're right. You're obviously right. But my point that I'm trying to arrive at is that no matter what he chooses as his bluff range, it's going to be those hands that have pretty high equity, but always... It's very difficult to find Matt's race folds. Is what I'm ultimately getting at.
What hands do you have that raise folds?
Ace X with a heart, like Ace 10 with a heart, Ace Jack with a heart.
Like any hand that continues the flop that has 1 heart, 1 diamond, and then
or just gutter no draw, like Ace 8 of clubs.
Yeah, exactly. The Ace 8, the Ace 7, like they're going to be there.
And now they fold versus the jam.
Right. They're there. They're just like pretty low frequency, I guess. And so like now what you ultimately arrive at is maybe the 10% block wasn't good. Right? Because I think that would be my ultimate takeaway is that I recognize that even though I'm betting with a chip, I'm checking with a chip basically, what ultimately happens is when I guess I don't want to say instigate this raise, but effectively whenever you incentivize Matt to put a raise in with some portion of his range, you now set yourself up for a bet 3-bet jam. And the problem is that despite the fact that your bet was relatively meaningless in accordance to percentage of the pot, it's still a bet.
Well, you force yourself to play against a polar range from
exactly.
Hunt, because Hunt is only raising really good hands
exactly.
that can stack off.
That's my point. Is
or straight nothing.
Hunt's bet range when check to will be slightly wider than Hunt's raise range, even when only facing 10% pot.
So when you regress into a polar range, you put yourself in a position where they call it better and fold worse.
And what I'm getting at is Jeremy's entire range is pretty much merged, right? Like he has poles to this range, but it's tough because the low end stuff is just way too low in equity to bet 3-bet jam, right? And
it's like a 9. It's like a 6-7.
Yeah, like
no flush draw. Right?
And these hands just don't really function, right? They're just not going to make for good bet 3-bet jams. They're punts in ICM world. So you do need a hand that's high enough up in the equity distribution that you can justify getting it in, like King 8 of Hearts, maybe 7-8 of Hearts, if the 7 was a non-heart, whatever. But the point is that like now whenever you start to unpack that, it's like, well, those hands don't really want to do that, right? They just want to arrive at the river and realize their equity to the fullest as cheaply as possible. And that's why we bet 10% to begin with, was to freeze him, right? But that plan failed, and now we have this like equity dense range that also can't jam because Hunt's raising range is mostly like sets plus.
It's almost like I'm going to hope you don't raise, like, oh shit, he raised. Now I can go all in because I'm going to hope he folds. But the issue with hoping that he folds is that you're folding out the bluffs and you get called bet better.
I truly think that,
and it's fine because you have equity, but still you kind of
exactly. And that's the biggest takeaway here that I think the listeners can pull from this is that I think that these are some of the biggest learning moments in no limit hold'em, whether you're playing tournaments or cash or what have you, is scenarios where you put a bunch of money in with a hand that should be relatively high in equity, and you get called by what appears to be top of range. Once you start to work that backwards and realize that like Hunt's pocket sixes here are not top of his range, right? No. It's like middle to upper 2/3 of his range. Honestly, maybe it's closer to middle because I don't know that his bottom is too much worse.
Do you mean middle of my raising range on the turn?
Jamming.
Calling off?
Yeah, you're calling off.
Yeah. I mean, literally sixes, king 9 is the bottom. It's king, like the call off range is exactly king 9 suited, which is 2 combos, set of kings, set of 9s, set of 6s.
Right. Okay. So if that's your call off range,
nothing else.
If that's your call off range,
and then,
right?
I guess
now we look
king of hearts, right? If you're raising turn,
that doesn't even raise. I don't think.
Pair plus flush draw, you just peel.
Yeah, it just peels
I
for
think
sure.
that was
way too strong.
That was just peeling because we don't want him to ever we don't want him to ever fold a trashy flush draw or something.
So now if you compartmentalize that and you say, okay, well, your call off range is your top of range, right? And 6 is at the bottom of the top of range, so to speak. What's the rest of the range look like that now raise folds? Well, it's disproportionate because there are so few hands that encapsulate that raise fold that now 6s are actually they're pushed much closer to the bottom of your overall raising range on the turn, period, right? There's just not a lot of hands in this raising range to begin with. So once you run it with king 8 suited here and you see 6s, you either say, oh, that was really unlucky, or you take a beat and you say, well, hold on a second. If he has 6s here in this particular spot and didn't seem all that comfortable with it, how many worse hands can I expect to be in this raising range?
I think it's just the compartmentalization of strategy, where if someone's strategy is when they bet one big blind, I have to raise ace king, or he thinks to himself that I've induced this raise from king X. Yeah. That seeing 6s here is unlucky versus he's not supposed to raise in the first place. This is a polar range where I'm going to see really like top end value and then a proportionate amount of ace X, like ace Broadway hard bluffs. Now king 8's like, this is really bad.
Yeah, that's the big aha moment, is when you go from I induced that to happening, or I induced that action and I got unlucky that I ran into a set, to, oh, actually, he isn't really incentivized to raise with very many hands at all. I just laid him a super good price, and he's probably not just going to yeet it off with all of his hands that have equity. Therefore, maybe I went wrong somewhere, either in the lead or in the 3-bet jam. But I do think that like these high equity hands offer a big learning experience, because running the equity is fine. You're going to be fine. It doesn't make a difference. It's all going to come out in the wash.
And you cover. So if you lose, you still in the tournament.
Yeah, because like big picture, you just have a ton of equity. So like running it, it's like never folding kings pre-flop. It's fine because your equity's so high. Like just running it for a lifetime, you're going to do just fine. But what you want to look at is the broader strategy. What other hands are encapsulated around this one particular hand that has high equity? How do your middle equity hands perform? How do your low equity hands perform? And that's where you'll start to see the failure points of like, oh, well, I actually couldn't just run it here with everything. You know, if I got it in here with king, queen that I bet with and got raised and jammed, expecting like, you know, some hands to fold, some worse to call, some draws to be in there, yada, yada, yada. I'm actually just fucking dead 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
I'm going to very quickly see what happens if I lock myself to never raise like anything that's in this middle region.
Right. So you just have like dog shit or like a set.
So if I lock myself to only raise sets, 2 pairs, and then whatever bluffs the sim wants to raise. A very narrow range. It's going to be maybe some combo draws. Now in Chippy V, it wants him. Wow. Okay. It
blocks kings. So
yeah. It basically. Okay. King eight of hearts is not jamming. King 8 of the other suits is jamming. Maybe to deny the flush draws that I'm raising if the sim wants me to raise flush draws. But it doesn't want him to do a lot of 3-betting, basically.
Pretty much none,
yeah. He only has a straight or a combo draw.
Right. Yeah.
Because
literally
because of my
some 4-3 in there.
I think the reason why it's jamming the king 8 is just because go back to his range.
Yeah, sure.
Really quickly.
Well, the king 8 blocks should hunts 2 pairs that raise the turn.
Right. It blocks the 2 pairs, and he doesn't have a whole lot other 8x. So it's basically that double factor, right? Like it takes away the king 9s and king 6s that hunt. Well, I don't know if he has king 6, whatever. And it also blocks 8-7, which is really critical. So basically, the entire strategy for Jeremy is built around the nuts.
Yeah.
Like, well, the nuts want to be all in, so we need to find something to complement the nuts, and it's just a couple combos of king 8 there.
Right. And I guess if I do raise the combo, well, see it's still Chippy V, so like the sim is still. It wants me to. I tell you what I should do is I should lock myself to never raise a combo draw on the turn either, because
you're never raising like Jack 10 of hearts.
Right. I forgot that the sim is going to like default me into doing that a lot on the turn. If I lock certain categories, it's going to keep if I keep other categories unlocked, it's going to use like the combo draws here as its bluffs. So basically, let's just say we're never raising like flush draws. We can raise gut shots on the turn, but we're just going to keep a lot of stuff unlocked.
They'll probably still choose like a gut shot with a diamond or a
It's
heart.
cool that I didn't realize you could choose like actual equity buckets when it comes to node lock.
Oh yeah, you can do a shitload with the filters. Yeah, you can do all sorts of things with the filters.
Yeah, now he plays 0 raise.
Yeah. Now it doesn't want him to ever raise. You know, if I raise basically a very polar range and I'm getting it in, it still has me. That's wild. It still has me calling it off with ace 8 for some reason. I don't know why that is, but if I'm basically only raising the 2 pair plus for value and basically not anything else, it just doesn't want him to play any jams, and it's because we're just kind of in this ace 5 or something is in there. We're just kind of in this position where he doesn't benefit from jamming into a polar range. You know, he doesn't benefit from jamming into a range that just has so many hands in it that have an easy call off or an easy fold, you know? So he's now back to never jamming. Obviously ICM is going to slightly alter this because he does have the ability to, he has a little bit of extra leverage in ICM in theory, but it's still going to come down to a question of my range being very polar. And if my range is very polar, then it just doesn't result in that many difficult decisions for me, which is obviously benefiting me. So I would be very interested to hear exactly what Jeremy's thought process was here, but I don't know if we'll ever know. He may not chime in, but we'll see.
He shouldn't chime in.
He probably shouldn't. I have a suspicion.
Keep grinding, young man.
I have a suspicion that the main reasoning that he did this was because he just figured that I probably do raise like too much ace king and stuff on the turn. Like I think he might have just been thinking, well, most people don't really recognize that ICM doesn't incentivize them to raise ace king of spades or whatever on the turn. But you know, I do know that. I do know I'm not supposed to raise ace king.
I don't know, man. I don't play tournaments.
I don't even know how much you peel flop. Even it's scary. Scary.
Yeah,
you would with backdoors.
I think
sure, but
the sim that I ran did have me peeling. I think it was all ace 10 plus, and then the king queens and king jacks that have a heart were peeling, and then the king queens and king jacks that have backdoor
you want to have
diamonds.
like some delayed bluffs. Whenever
so
he goes like bet check.
It was because it was a range lead for him, and his range is still like moderately wide. It was still peeling the ace kings with no backdoor there, but obviously that's peeling to fold on a lot of turns.
Right.
So it was an interesting spot, and obviously running the ICM sim here is a bit tricky when you have to run it through HRC and then put it into PO. But hopefully, within the next couple months, GTO Wizard is going to release post-flop ICM. That's
you say hopefully.
I do say hopefully.
I gotta tell you, man. I honestly, I hope for it just for the sake of me feeling like I'm competent at tournaments again. It's so wild. Like, all of this seems so complex to me as somebody who understands the game through a very specific lens, right? Mm-hmm. Like it really taints the lens through which you see the game, because again, you're always constantly playing with these thresholds where it's like, well, I know that at this stack depth for this pot size, with this many bets behind, my stack off threshold is around here. And it's like, now that we just have to arbitrarily like raise and lower that stack off threshold based off of some mechanic of the payouts, it becomes really challenging to kind of fix all this stuff, especially because so many things become dynamic in the variables, right? Like your ranges now become incredibly dynamic, and it's not as easy to like, you get accustomed to just like bucketing ranges off of positions, right? So it's like, I know what an early position range looks like, and you can monkey with the format as much as you want, but I'm going to know how to expand and contract them, right? Like if you add a big ante, I'm going to know where I should start pulling more hands from. If you remove the ante altogether, I'm going to know how to contract, whatever. But whenever you get into these dynamics where it's like the stacks are so variant, sometimes the chip leader's to your left, sometimes he's to your right, sometimes you're stuck in the middle between two larger stacks and all this other stuff, and all of that's going to impact the way that you get to enter pots. It becomes really, it becomes difficult, because to me, I don't see a framework through which we can just like make logical conclusions.
Yeah, and that's honestly, that the element of every single spot being different is why I love tournaments so much. That the fact that every spot you're brain solving for a new set of variables, because the stacks are changing, the payouts are, you're going through the payout list and all that stuff. That's what I love about MTTs, and building those strategies on the fly. And the more you learn, the more you study, the more you start to understand how to take these variables into account at different times. And it is hard to simplify down to this is what your range is in every spot from this position, because it's going to alter. My under the gun range here is going to be very different from my under the gun range if I have the chip lead, or right. I have the stack that Jeremy has and he has the stack that I have. If we swap the stacks, I'm going to open 2x, and I'm going to open probably an extra 5 or 7% of hands, maybe more. Yeah. And he's going to defend a totally different range, and it's a completely different spot. So it just fascinates me, and it's why I love studying MTTs for sure.
Yeah, it's
probably why you hate it.
No, because I certainly am very much of the mind that the best version of poker is the one that we can't answer. I for sure am here for street poker. I think that like the more that we're freestyling, the better. I think what I dislike about it is that in this particular model, the people who disobey it actually hurt me indirectly.
Oh yeah,
right?
That's annoying.
Yeah, so I don't like the idea of me being able to actually accumulate some level of knowledge that should garner me an edge, but it doesn't necessarily, because the next person who disobeys it could potentially just wipe out my edge.
Well, you also don't like to play good hands passively. Let's be honest.
The other interesting part is you can start adding that element into how you can account for other people's tendency to punt in your own decisions.
Right.
If you are expecting the people around you to punt,
I think Chewy's really great at this.
How you play.
I think Chewy's one of the best that I've seen at this, in the sense that I've watched him not just big final tables, but I played a fair amount during COVID with him in on the WSOP site, and I've watched him from afar. He's really fucking great at recognizing like when the environment isn't conducive to what theory wants you to do, and just like over adjusting in a way that may not be intuitive to everybody else. Like I watched him, I think he just like open folded sevens from like the hijack or the cutoff at a final table where it was just clear that there was like too much shit being thrown by the people to his left. You know what I mean? Like he was like a middle stack. First was obviously massive by comparison, so it was one of those like really top heavy type of events.
Yeah.
But he had like a stack that was able to be navigated, but he had people to his left that were just gonna fuck with him. And it was like, well, if I open sevens here, I'm gonna have to run it, kind of thing. And he just said like, you know, I don't know what the model is necessarily going to say, but I think I'm not supposed to run it here. Right. Like, I think I'm disincentivized to. And I watched him like crawl all the way back from being like, you know, 5 of 5, 4 of 4, 3 of 3 to just win the whole thing. And it was like predicated off of that initial fold. It's like, man, I just don't have that in me.
Well, the good news is there's the opposite spots as well. There's the spots where you have chips and you get to absolutely rampage people who are doing things they should never be doing, right? And that's the element of ICM that people don't think to study. People are always thinking about like, oh, how do I find the spots to make the big ICM folds? Like you need to be focusing on how to find the spots where I get to open 85% of hands and c-bet 100% of flops and shit like that. You know, that's fun too.
yeah, that is fun. If you get in the right cash game, you get to do that all the time.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you can play 100, 200 stakes and open 85% of hands and c-bet 100% of flops and still make money, you're doing very well. Yeah.
Maybe you can't do it on the aggregate, but there are definitely spots. You know, there might be a spot at the table that you could probably play 85% of hands.
That's fair.
C-bet 100, but yeah, really fascinating stuff. Appreciate you bringing it to the pod today.
Happy to be here.
That's gonna do it for us. Don't forget that we do have an academy coming up in May. Matt Hunt is going to be leading it. It's the Tournament Academy. We only run one a year, so if you guys want to get prepped for this year's WSOP, be sure to head to academy.solveforwhy.io. Check that out. We did have to cancel the March Academy. We had a conflict of interest, but there will be another Cash Academy in May, right before the Tournament Academy as well. Landon is on his way to go play Bally's Big Bet today. It's a coach's stream. They're going to be playing 1025, no limit. Some of the best in the world. No big deal. Tice in the mix. So be sure to head over and check that out. I had other things that I wanted to plug, but man, I forgot what they were. So that's going to do it for us. We'll be back tomorrow, 11 a.m. Pacific. We have a very special guest in Dorian Yates, 6-time Mr. Olympia. Big shout out to Craig Tapscott, who was able to make that happen. He's going to be, Craig is going to be live in studio. Dorian is going to be calling in from Spain. So if you guys have any questions, be sure to head over to our Twitter account at onlyfriends_pod. We have a thread started there. Put your questions in there. I'll be sure to get as many of them out as I can tomorrow when we speak to Dorian. And yeah, that's going to do it for us. We'll see you guys all 11 a.m. tomorrow.
Peace. Later, squad.
Peace.